Welcome to Leadership and Life Chat with your hosts, me, Becky Ames.
And me, Mark Curtis. In each episode, we'll be illustrating how success in leadership is inextricably linked with success in life.
Whether it's leadership in business, society, family or friends, we're all leaders.
Using our experiences and a range of expert guests, we'll share secrets to boosting your health, wealth and self.
So let's get on with the show.
Resilience is something we've talked about on the show before, Becky, and people might start to roll their eyes going, oh, not resilience again. However, I've just recently had a TEDx video shared by my business coach, and I found it really interesting. It really hit home, and I thought, you know what, I know we've covered it before, but given what's going on in the world, there's a lot of stress, anxiety out there at the moment. People are worried about, geopolitics. They're worried about the state of the economy. They're worried about the state of the environment. There's a lot of stresses out there at the moment. And I thought now feels the right time as a leader to focus on, okay, what can I do? Just refresh myself. What are the things I can do to help build my personal resilience? And then what can I share with my team? Because ultimately, stuff is always going to be going on. And it's how we deal with it, which is important. And what tools do we have in our toolkit? So as I say, we've covered it before, Becky, but if it's okay with you, I'd really like to cover off this TEDx talk on resilience, which I watched last week.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't think you can revisit this stuff too often, actually, because you can always hone your skills, change your approach. We just need some more practical ways of being able to manage this, don't we?
Yeah, I think so. And there's a lot of information out there, and there's so many different techniques of dealing with things. And this isn't meant to be, a counseling session, a counseling podcast. This is just about, okay, practical steps. What can we do? So the TEDx talk that was shared with me was with Dr. Lucy Hone, and she'd basically spent a career in academia looking at what is resilience? How do we build resilience? And I think she got to the point where she was about to roll this stuff out for general consumption. It was going to be commercialized. It's meant for businesses, how people can improve their resilience. And we'll obviously put a link in the show notes to the TEDx talk. So it's only a quarter of an hour long. People should take a listen. Then tragedy struck, and her 12-year-old daughter was killed in a car crash. And she had to deal with that. Her and her husband and her family had to deal with this. So she had to put into practice all of the things that she'd kind of worked on in theory. She had to put into practice for herself. So for me, is there a tick in the box going, this person has had to live and breathe this stuff? And it's not just theoretical. It's not just something which has happened, in a lab. It's something which has been applied in the real world. So yeah, it does. Absolutely. Tragic story. And Dr. Hone shares in the TEDx talk the three big things which came out as part of her research, which she had to apply for her and her family, and it works basically. So based on that, I think we should talk around those 3 points. I've shared them with you, Becky. I've shared the TEDx talk with you, so we both know where we're coming from on this one. So over to you, really, for the first point, which Dr. Hone brings forward.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So the first point, which really just sums it up for me, is happens. And she talks about how you need to stop feeling discriminated against, and it's that whole why me aspect of it, isn't it? We've all had challenging things to deal with, and I remember my mum saying to me when I was much younger, everyone has stuff, everyone has things that they're dealing with. The classic thing of walk a mile in someone's shoes and all of that. But yeah, certainly on the TEDx talk, she talks about if you stop the why me and you stop feeling like, how could this possibly have happened to me? It's so unfair. Then you're much better able to deal with it. And life does throw absolute curveballs at us all, doesn't it? Some big, some small, and we've got to be able to somehow manage those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the phrase she used was suffering is part of existence. It's almost like to exist is to suffer. This sounds like we're going into philosophy now, doesn't it? And it's true, isn't it? That there's good stuff and there's bad stuff. It's very easy to focus on, and this was extreme bad stuff. Yeah. But if we bring it back into the context of most of our day-to-day lives, the bad stuff is pretty minor in our work environments as leaders, but it's very, very easy if we're not careful to get incredibly focused onto that, and we blow it out of proportion. We know that, and we focus too heavily on that. And we've talked about it on the podcast before, but one of the things which can you can help to identify within yourself on this is, do you have an external locus of control or do you have an internal locus of control? We actually did a whole episode on this, and again, we'll link it into the show notes. So just as a refresher, and for people who maybe are new to the podcast, if you've got an external locus of control, then you effectively let the world happen to you. It's like the world does this. Oh, I can't believe it. It's raining outside. It's ruined my day. It's very much letting control go to, the four winds. You don't take any control or responsibility for what happens to you. An internal locus of control is where you say, okay, what could I have done differently? How did this happen? What can I do to take control of this situation? And I think Dr. Hone is very much talking about, making this an internal locus of control. I think at times of extreme stress, even on small things, it's very tempting to not take or not want to take responsibility. The easiest thing in the world as a short-term fix for ourselves is to feel sorry for ourselves and give that responsibility away. But by giving the responsibility away, we give the control away as well, don't we?
Yeah.
And it's very easy to do that. And I think even if you have a strong internal locus of control, it's kind of nice to do that occasionally, but for a split second. And then it's like, oh, come on, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Bring it on back. What can I do about this? What she's talking about is an extreme version of what she had to go through. But for leaders, I think if we can bring it back into ourselves, rather than going, oh, why me? Why did this customer choose to go elsewhere? We could ask ourselves, well, why did the customer choose to go elsewhere? What can I find out about it? What can I learn from it? What can I do differently? Rather than just going, well, that customer, they were complete idiots anyway. I'd never really wanted to deal with them, or whatever defense mechanism might kick in. So I think within this stuff, great what she was saying, suffering is part of life. Losing a client can be suffering. It hurts, it cuts deep, but what can we learn from it? And I think all business leaders out there, anyone listening to this, you're going to have in your head things that have happened to you at small levels, big levels, where you've kind of completely given away control, because basically you wanted to go back to that 3-year-old and have a complete tantrum, throw yourself on the floor and kick and scream, and maybe just do it momentarily because it's good to have a release, but then bring it back again.
No, absolutely. And I think this isn't about being perfect in any way, is it? There is an initial reaction, and you do need to vent sometimes and make sure you have a safe environment to do that in. People you can pick the phone up to or whatever that you can do that with. But it's then about taking it back and going, okay, phrase that I like to use a lot is to flip it. You can't always do that, but often there's a positive that you can focus on, or you can just accept, like you say, that this stuff happens and I control how I respond to it within reason. None of us are perfect, but we have choice, don't we? And if we live consciously and we recognise that it's not just us that's being, subjected to these awful things, it's part of life. It is part of life. Otherwise we would never take any risks, would we? Because everything might go wrong. Relationships, work, anything. If you didn't want to, potentially be vulnerable, lay yourself open to it, then we wouldn't do anything. And how awful would that be? So it is very much about understanding that stuff happens and we need to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, and this is quite relevant at the moment. On Friday, Glenda's uncle passed away, and he was 84. He'd had a really good innings. We went and saw the family at the weekend. We spent time with people, and it was really interesting. Probably the most common phrase I heard was, "I can't believe he's gone." And there's obviously the grief process. We know the grief process. I think we've talked about it on the podcast before, where there's the element of denial going on, and that's part of that denial coming out. For me, it's almost like with that. If you keep using that language, I can't believe, I can't believe, then it coming back to Lucy's Holmes point, which happens. If we continue to do that for too long a period, then I suspect we start to find it harder to accept and move on because of the language we're using as well. And we've done a lot of work on our podcast around the use of language. And as I say, this is not a criticism of anyone, because it's very, very early doors, but it's interesting just listen to what people say as well. And I think as a leader, the point for me on this as well is that when we're listening to our own language, when we're listening to the language of our teams, we can pick up some massive clues. They're right in front of us just by listening to what people say and the language that they're actually using and the words they're using.
Yeah. And I think that phrase that you said you heard a lot at the weekend, I can't believe, it is something you often hear, isn't it? In any scenario, we need to expect that these things will happen because it's inevitable, isn't it? And somehow we need to deal with the shock and move through that stage onto the next part of the process, as you say. Obviously, very sad in that instance, certainly. But when we're dealing with business people in our everyday lives, that can't believe sort of, it implies that people are living in a very sort of cocoon sheltered way, doesn't it? And they're not exposing them to perhaps what might happen and not thinking ahead enough. You need to be realistic about what could happen and be ready to deal with it. And everyone is dealing with it. Everyone's dealing with something at any time. And I think that's the important thing.
Definitely, yeah. And I think you're taking that phrase, as you were saying, into smaller issues. So, I can't believe we've lost this client. I can't believe this person's going to go and be employed somewhere else. Again, a smaller version. I guess it's still the grief cycle kicking in if we lose a client or if someone chooses to go and work somewhere else. But it's trying to upgrade our language pretty quickly on the minor points, especially in business situations. If we're all sitting around there effectively having a pity party going, oh, I can't believe this, I can't believe it, say it once, move on. Let's upgrade our language. Let's kind of take control of the situation so we don't have to kind of go back to the Lucy Hone phrase, which is why me. We get away from the why me. The bigger stuff, let's take our time, let's go through a process.
Absolutely.
Smaller stuff, let's just kick it and move on.
Definitely.
Excellent. So there was so many points came out from Lucy's point there. So a great starting point. The second one, which was key for me, when I heard this, I thought, yeah, this really makes sense, which is people are really good at choosing where to focus their attention. So she went on to say it's about accepting the things you can't change. So I think this really builds on the first point. Stuff happens. We can't necessarily change it. But what we can do is we can choose where we put our focus. So there's the classic control circles, isn't it? It's like you've got the core, which is this is the stuff you can control. Then you've got the stuff outside of that, which is, well, you can influence this, but you don't have direct control over it. And then everything else outside of that is stuff that we have no control over. So it's just bringing it back again, isn't it? To get away from that sort of why me thought process. What can I control? Where am I going to focus my attention? Because if I'm focusing on stuff which is outside of my control, then all I'm going to do is make myself feel bad. I'm going to get frustrated about it, and then I'm probably going to get angry about it. And none of this is helping with building personal resilience around big stuff and little stuff. Just day-to-day business stuff. If we're just in that process of worrying about the bits that we just can't do anything about, or trying to change something which we've got no control over, it's just going to drive us nuts, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And you said the word there for me that I often have this sort of conversation with my daughter, who's 17, nearly 18, about, if you're worrying about something, can you do anything about it? If you can't, you need to stop worrying. Now, that's very easy to say, isn't it? Stop worrying. You can train yourself, can't you, to go, actually, if I can't control this, if I can't change it, I've just got to run with it, and I can choose whether I completely divert and don't engage with whatever it is, or just sort of plough on, really. It's often something I say to her, and I know it's very easy to say and harder to put into practice. I'm such a believer in, if you can't do anything about it, what is the point in worrying about it? Because like we said at the outset, stuff happens, and a lot of it we cannot control. So we kind of have to get through it, and we have to choose how we react to it, obviously. But if we can control or influence it, great, do it. Absolutely do it. Don't shy away from it. If we can't recognise that and move on.
Dr. Hone came up with an exercise that we can all do every day, which is basically ask people 3 good things that have happened to them. Pretty much everyone can come up with some good stuff which has happened that day. For me, this then comes back into journaling, writing stuff down. Even if you're not asking, you ask yourself. I could say to myself, Mark, what 3 good things have happened today? I can ask myself that question. I don't need someone else to do it. If I'm not very disciplined, maybe I do need a buddy on this one to kind of just drop me an email or a text saying, come on, Mark, have you thought about your 3 things today? But either way, it can be done. And if we then write it down, what she found in her research, and it's proven now, is that people who do this, if they just write down or think of 3 good things that have happened each day, and it becomes a regular practice for them, it lowers their depression levels. Talking about building resilience, if such an easy thing to do. It's just so easy to do something like that, but it can have massively disproportionate positive impacts of doing it. So for me, that was a massive takeaway from the TEDx talk, which is just write down 3 good things that happen every day. Just write them down,
Yeah.
and focus on them, because the outcome is really positive for you as an individual.
Yeah.
So everyone can do that. There's no reason that anybody listening to this podcast, if they're not already doing it and they want to just kind of up their resilience levels a bit, that's a key takeaway for me. Just get those 3 things written down day in, day out. Just make it part of your routine.
Yeah. And it reinforces, doesn't it, the bits that went well, not just the bits that went well, but the bits that you were able to influence and drive to a positive outcome. And it's really important to have that stop and check and sort of review almost, and go, yeah, there were some really good bits, and I made those happen, or I was part of that, and just recognize the good stuff, because again, that helps in us managing the bad stuff, doesn't it? Because it kind of reminds us that there are lots of positives that we can take out of the day, and it's not all the negative, the horrible, the drudgery, the hard work. So really important. Something that I need to do, and I don't, I have to say.
Yeah, and I think we all, there you go. That's a big generalization. I think we all, it's very easy, and I find this for myself, and speaking personally, I start off with the best of intent on things like journaling, and then it goes by the wayside after a period of time.
Yeah.
And I think everyone has to find their own drumbeat about how to do this stuff. And this is reminding me, Becky, on one of our previous guests, Owen Fitzpatrick, who is a psychologist and was started as an NLP practitioner, and he was very much talking about daily habits. And James and I were talking about how we differ. James is very dedicated. He has his structure, what he works for him. He has to be structured and deliver upon his journaling, his 3 things, etc. Whereas for me, I find it becomes a chore, and in the end, I'm going through the motions rather than getting the real value out of it. And what Owen was saying on the podcast is that actually the really important thing around habits and resilience as well is to have the tools. If you've got the tools in your tool belt, then you just need to work out when to deploy the tools to give you the maximum benefit for you as an individual. If you need to be disciplined and you need to roll it out every day, do it. If you find it then becomes counterproductive to do that, just pull out the right tool at the right time. It very much is a personal journey for different people around this.
Yeah, and I completely agree in terms of you're not doing this for anyone else other than yourself. So if it's hard, if it's too hard and it's not benefiting you, why would you continue? But also don't discount it in terms of something that might help at a future point. It's like any habit, as you say, isn't it? Great if it continues, but if it just works for a period of time, fantastic. You're not doing this to please anyone else. This is about helping yourself and finding what works for you, and that can change. Absolutely, it'll shift over time.
And it's no different to like the gym, is it? How many people get a gym membership? Best of intentions. You could link it into, I'm going to write 3 things down every day. I'm going to go to the gym every day, and I guess 80% of people who have a gym membership probably don't use it very much. I'm guessing if they're anything like me, but then other people do, don't they? Because they need that structure, they need that discipline. Where for me, actually buying a dog is the best thing, because I then feel a duty of care to take the dog out for a walk. So that works for me. Buying a gym pass doesn't work for me. No. So it's just working out, everyone's individual. What works for you? What's going to make you do your 3 things every day? Do you need to write it down? Do you want to just think about it? Because even if we think about it, at least we've put some positive intent around how we're mentally approaching this stuff. And now we know the benefits of it from Dr. Holmes' work. I've got to find a way to do this that works for me. It would just be silly to not do it.
No, and
there's no downside of doing it.
No, there isn't any downside, is there? I mean, it's not going to take much time. Just give it a go. And there's lots of different tools. Like you say, having your toolkit there and being able to pull out whatever you need at a given time is the key, I think, and finding those different touch points that really will help you get through difficult times, not so difficult times as well. If we practice this stuff when we don't need it quite so much, then it's easier, isn't it, to call on it in the really tricky times when our energy is at a low ebb and we really need that help.
That's a great point, Becky. I think that's a great point you've just pulled out there, which is, it's a bit like this is about preparation. It's it's prevention, not cure, isn't it? If we can do this stuff, it's fixing the roof when the sun is shining analogy, isn't it? If we can do this stuff when we don't actually need it, it's easier to do it than when we're at a time of heightened emotion or stress or anxiety. So to try and start it up at that point, it's like, well, why do sports teams practice? Why don't they just rock up on the day and just play? Because they practice and they train because they get better at it. So when it comes to match day, they're primed, they're mentally ready, they're physically ready. So that was a massive point, I think, which is very easy to overlook here. Whilst we need to put it in our toolkit, we need to be practiced at it. So when we do need to deploy it, it has the desired effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Any emergency services, they run drills, don't they? They practice scenarios, things like that, so that when it's needed, it happens. It's almost second nature. And I think it's a bit like you need to have worked a muscle so that when you actually then need to put it into operation, it's not so hard. It's kind of like that memory that you go, oh yeah, this will help me. There's definitely stuff we can all do every day that will just help us get there a little bit better when we actually need to call on those reserves.
So we're recording this, it's 12 o'clock lunchtime. Have you had 3 good things that have happened to you today already, Becky?
3 things already? Yeah, I have. Well, it's very warm in the UK today, and so coming in the office was lovely because we're very lucky to have air conditioning, so that's really positive. It's Monday, the team were buzzing, which is great, so I really feed off that, which is really nice to be in that environment. Well, I guess getting to chat with you guys today, or you and Lizzie in the background, producer Lizzie as well, there's loads of good stuff, isn't there, if you think about it? Oh, I know.
That's sweet. Thank you.
All right.
Excellent. So do you want to move on to the third point, Becky?
Yeah. So the third point that Dr. Hone had, which again, it's a really, really good one, is to ask yourself, is what I'm doing helping or harming me, both in my thinking and in my actions? And again, it's about being conscious, isn't it, about your thoughts as well as your actions. And Mark, we were talking earlier about how it's easier almost with our actions for someone else to call us out on them, isn't it? Because obviously they see if we're doing something that's really not helpful to ourselves and sort of pull us up on it. It's our thoughts that are going to probably catch us out more, I think, because unless you express them, nobody knows what's going on in your head. But I think you do have to stop and challenge yourself and go, actually, is this helpful? Am I going down a road here that is really not going to help me either today or in the longer term, that I'm just allowing myself this, the term wallow is not intended to be derogatory at all. It's just, if you let yourself go down a path, you can end up somewhere pretty bad, can't you? And I think you have to steer yourself away from that. You have to recognize it. You have to spot the signs. And if someone else can call you out on it because it's coming through in your actions, then that's really helpful. But it's about owning it ourselves and being very aware of our thoughts and what's going to help us veer back to the more positive track, probably.
Yeah, and it's very much linked to that first point, isn't it? I think the phrase she used, it puts you back in the driver's seat and puts you back in control of your decision making. So we touched on internal, external locus of control. If you just have the pause button and you just continually ask yourself that question, is it helping or harming me? Then ultimately you have to take responsibility for the action or the thought that you then take off the back of it.
Yeah.
And I suspect, knowing myself, this could lead to some tremendous arguments with myself. I could probably have an argument with myself over this. Well, I think I'm going to have the last custard cream. Is that really helping you or harming you, Mark? Well, what harm can one do? Come on, just give me a break. So I could have an argument with myself about this, but at least it's making me think about it. It's stopping and challenging my own thinking and action that I'm going to take. And if I then choose to have the last custard cream, even though I did the rest of the pack already, I'm at least making a conscious decision to do it.
Yeah. It's, we can't wander through life blindly and then moan about what happens, can we? The consequences. We've got to be conscious. We've got to be clear on, actually, I knew that this wasn't probably the best path, but I decided to take it, whether it's the custard cream, the extra shot in the pub on a Friday night, whatever it might be. Just own it.
The extra hour in the office, You know, I mean, it hasn't just got to be about kind of eating and drinking, as it, you know, shows where we go, Becky, with, you know, custard creams and gin and tonic or whatever. But it could be that, you know, people are trying to numb themselves through work. You know, we've talked about it on the podcast before, which is anything that ends in sort of holic is potentially an issue. So, you know, alcoholic, workaholic, it's just as damaging. So, you know, again, it will, asking this question, it isn't going to stop it happening, but it does just put a little break on it to make us then hopefully have time to engage, you know, the prefrontal cortex. We get through the other two parts of our brain, we get to the human thinking part where we can then go, okay, I'm doing this. I'm making a conscious decision to do this still. It may not be right, but I'm doing it. Or actually, I need to take control of this and stop giving responsibility away. This is the action I'm going to take. You know, it's just that pause button again, isn't it? It's giving ourselves time to do the human thing, which is use the rational part of our brain.
Yeah. And I think that pause button is something that's come through in so many of the podcasts that we've had guests on, about how it's really important to stop and reflect and think. And we're so busy and run hectic lives and, you know, convince ourselves that we don't have time to stop. Just don't. And actually that's us telling ourselves the same thing again, isn't it? We do. We all have that opportunity to stop, breathe, think. And I think it's really important that we do it, because otherwise we can just end up taking ourselves, as I said, down a road that really isn't right for us, isn't healthy. If we do it consciously, that's a different thing, you know, and we understand what the consequences are going to be, maybe, but to just walk blindly through is a dangerous thing, and we really do need to stop and to just assess, is this really helping me or harming me in the longer term as well?
Yeah, and to add and build on that, one of the things that I find personally is that I can easily get into doing mode rather than being mode. And when the pressure is on, whether it be, you know, that pressure could be anything. It could be work pressure. It could be because there's bad stuff going on. Personally, I find when I'm under pressure, whatever that might mean, I just go into doing. And then once you get into doing, I find that I stop thinking as much. I stop asking myself this kind of question, and I almost run on like autopilot. I'm almost running on a pre-programmed kind of algorithm within my brain, which I don't actually stop and think about. So, you know, classic example is, you know, Glenda, my wife, had to have an op 6 weeks ago, so she's been out of action in terms of, you know, like doing stuff. So I've had to kind of, I've chosen to take on some, apart from washing the floor, that's still on the to-do list, and she keeps telling me I haven't done that one yet. But everything else, you know, I'm kind of like, I'm there, I'm walking the dogs, I'm cooking breakfast, I'm going to work, I'm walking the dogs again, I'm getting lunch, I'm kind of hoovering a bit, haven't done the ironing, the mother-in-law did that luckily, you know, but it's all this, there's all this stuff going on, and I've become, the only word I can really choose which frames it for me is frantic. I've been frantic over the last 6 weeks. And because of that, I've been my decision making has become suboptimal, open brackets, pretty poor, close brackets, in terms of, like, you know, myself. I've not been giving myself the space to think about my decision. I've just been run on autopilot. So I can see, just based on the last 6 weeks, I can see how easy it is for people to not ask this question, because you can convince yourself, I haven't got time to do this. You know, I haven't meditated for 6 weeks, which is most unlike me, as you know, and I feel much worse for it because I haven't given myself the space. Because I haven't given myself space, I haven't been asking myself this sort of question. I haven't been observing myself well enough. So my resilience is probably, it's been sheer grunt and willpower at times, which has kept me going, not genuine resilience, if that makes any sort of sense. And I've got a couple of weeks off at the end of this week, and all I'm doing at the moment is I'm trying to get to that finishing line of Friday to go, right, when I get to Friday, then I'll ... And I know it doesn't need to be that way. So we are not coming necessarily from a position of, like, you know, holier than thou on this podcast. We try and keep it real in terms of our own personal experiences. If I could now rewind the clock and go back 6 weeks, I would have done the last 6 weeks differently, but I just got caught up in the whole thing. So, you know, one of the things that for me, I'm going, right, next time I get into a situation where things get a bit frantic for whatever reason, I need to really learn from this last 6 weeks and not repeat the last 6 weeks. I need to do it differently. So that's fine. I'm cool with that. I don't beat myself up about it because I'm recognizing it's a learning experience,
Yeah.
and I would do it differently next time. I would store this one away and go, yep, it's not helpful. So that question would need to be much more forefront of my mind. Is what I'm doing helping me or harming me?
Yeah. And there's no criticism in terms of, you've admitted that, yeah, we're not perfect, are we? And it's all very well to talk about this stuff. The reality is that we have great habits, and then sometimes we break them, or life takes over. I mean, imagine in that scenario, knowing you put pressure on yourself probably to make sure that none of the plates dropped, to keep them all spinning. And if you step back and look at it, some of the stuff that you've probably put pressure on yourself to do, it wouldn't have mattered particularly. There's things that have to happen in a day, isn't there? But there's other things that you could have just let it go. But you wanted to. At the time, you felt that you wanted to do that. And I think it's important to recognise that sometimes we do just have to get through these periods. And as long as there's an end to it, that's okay. And we learn from it. That's okay too. But you wouldn't be able to continue like this, would you, for a longer period of time? So, maybe shorter episodes of living like that, under that pressure, and perhaps it's not great, but it's not the end of the world either. And like you said, you've learned from it. But it's very easy to let all these great habits slip. But it's about going, okay, they do make me feel better and I need to get back to it. I've not been exercising as much as I would like to generally, and that I know makes me feel better in myself and more mentally alert. I sleep better, I feel better in my overall health. And I know I need to get back to it. And, that is now happening. But that doesn't mean, I know why it happened. Life took over and other things became more important. But I made those decisions. And I think, again, you press pause, you go, actually, what's not working? What am I doing that's not helping me?
And I've definitely not, apart from walking the dogs, I've not been exercising. I mean, I've been averaging between 16 and 30,000 steps a day on my watch, which has scared me a bit. But I haven't been exercising because, right, nightmare, Curtis story here. The Thursday Glenda came out of hospital. I was due to pick her up. I thought, right, I'll just whip the old vacuum cleaner around before she gets home, so it looks like I've been making a bit of an effort,
Did you spray some polish about as well, so it smells?
I dropped it on my toe. I dropped the vacuum on my toe, and honestly, it's like I think I broke it, seriously. And it's like 6 weeks on now, and it's still really sore. But I can't. I've got to keep walking the dogs. So it's like I'm really worried. Like if there's anyone with medical experience listening to this podcast, my concern now is if it doesn't heal properly, I might have to have it amputated or something. So I'm getting a bit stressed about my little toe on my right foot. But
That's
anyway,
very dramatic.
it honestly, you should see it. It is still like twice the size of the other little toe. It's not good. Anyway, that's not my personal way. So one thing I would have done differently is I would have tried to avoid dropping the vacuum cleaner on my foot.
I think that indicates how little you use the vacuum cleaner usually. That the first time you attempt to use it, you break your toe. Maybe that's why this 6 weeks has been so hard for you.
It has been. The first week was quite difficult walking the dogs. Honestly, I was hobbling around. And yeah, I'm sure the listeners are bored now, but our youngest dog does pull like a trooper on the extendable lead, and every time she sees a piece of wildlife, she wants to chase it. So I'm having to hang on for dear life. And then you grip with your toes, don't you? And it's like, oh, not good, not good. Anyway, I think we should move to wrap up now, Becky. I've really enjoyed this one.
Yeah.
And thank you to Dr. Lucy Hone. As you said, we'll put links to Dr. Lucy Hone and her TEDx talk in there because it just had such massive value, and it really hit me hard when I listened to it. I thought, yep, I love this. There's 3 things we can really do, and I really want to get it out there on the podcast. So just as a reminder of the 3 points for the listeners, the first one is it happens, just move on with it. Suffering is part of existence, as she said, and it's just accepting that so we don't fall into the why me thought process. And we covered off internal, external locus of control. The second one is people get really good at choosing where they focus their attention. So we can all do this, however challenging it might be. And the exercise she suggested we all do is writing down or asking somebody what 3 good things have happened, and we become regular at that, and it helps reduce depression over time. And the third thing is a simple question we can ask ourselves, which is is what I'm doing helping or harming me? And we talked about, maybe the challenges of that around what's going on in our head versus the actions we're taking. Maybe you need a buddy to help you with some of this stuff. But it was a really powerful question. We talked a lot about that, and it ended up with me and my little broken toe. So thank you for listening. I hope you've got some value out of it. Obviously, if anyone wants to send me flowers to help with my recovery from my toe, it'd be gratefully received. So that brings us to the end of today's show. Just a couple of things. Firstly, everything will be in the show notes, so take a look there. Have a look at Dr. Hone's TEDx talk, really recommend it. Finally, a massive thank you to our sponsors, Larkin Gowan. Without Larkin Gowan, this show would not be possible. Have a look at their website to see how their team of experts can help you and your business. So Becky, that just leaves us to say, have a great week everyone, take care and boost your health, wealth and self.